Welcome to the Wokepedia podcast, season 2. This is going to be really, really exciting as we are going to go and show you how to not go woke, to stay on the straight and narrow. But I'm your host, Pastor Sam, and of course, I'm joined, like always, with Kyle Witt. Kyle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good today, Sam. I'm ecstatic. I'm excited to be here for the next season of the Wokepedia podcast. To not just continue what we've been doing, Sam, but to expand what we've been doing, to build upon it and improve and add
Absolutely.
new things.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that expansion that you're talking about, that is what we've been doing. In fact, our team has expanded. You're going to be finding out more on that in the coming weeks. But you know what we need to tell you,
Mhm.
first of all, is that it's not just season 2, new season, but it's also a new time for the podcast to drop. I believe our podcast was dropping Wednesdays before, but it's going to be Fridays. I know you're sitting here saying, wait a minute, it's a Monday. Well, that's just because we were so excited. We had to get it out early or 3 days
Yep.
late,
So we're going to
depending on how
be
you want to look at that.
Well, let's go with the early thing.
Let-
In fact, let's phrase it this way: you're getting 2 episodes this week. It's a
That's right.
twofer.
That's right.
Yeah, but we're going to be every Friday from now on. New episode of the Wokepedia podcast, and over the course of the next month or two, we're going to be releasing some new projects as well that are going to fill in the
Mhm.
gaps left by Wokepedia Radio. So you're still going to get multiple doses of Wokepedia each week. They're just going to change form a little bit into some fun new surprises that we have in the works.
Yeah, I'm really excited about those fun surprises that we have, and of course, like I said, the team has expanded. We the ministry has expanded, and I do want to remind you that Wokepedia is a ministry of enemies within the church, and so you can go and find out more at enemieswithinthechurch.com. Once again, that's enemieswithinthechurch.com. You can go there, hit that little red button that says donate. It helps keep ministries going like this. It goes and it really does fight the woke on the forefront, on the battlegrounds, really where we are. We are a boots on the ground type ministry going and really getting into this where nobody else is. I mean, there's a few other people around here. I don't want to say we're the only ones doing it, but we're the only ones who do it this well. That's what I would say. They might disagree, but I think I that's what I'm thinking. Um, and and I mean, I'm really excited about what season 2 has to bring us here, Kyle. One of the things that I think season 2 is going to bring us, that's going to go right alongside it, this is a ramp up in written content.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to let everybody know with the team expanding. And by the way, with the team expanding, I know you're going like, wait a minute, the team's expanding. It's just you and Kyle. We've seen this before. What do you mean the team's expanding? We are going to be doing some roundtable discussions. We are going to be going and doing that reoccurring discussions with the different contributors and different people who are adding to Wokepedia, but it's not going to be every week because they're busy doing some other stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're giving them the opportunity to do that. And you're going to benefit greatly about this. But, Kyle, I need to quit talking about how excited I am for season 2. We need to jump into season 2. And so,
Mm.
season 2, we're continuing a series we started in season 1. What is that series and what are we talking about today?
We're continuing the series of How the Woke Manipulate, where we explore these different styles of manipulation, predominantly centered around phrases you might hear. And this week, the phrase is "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," or you might have heard "Don't chew the meat, spit the bones," or "Chew the fat, spit the bones." They're getting at the same concept, and it's one that is heavily exploited by woke people to kind of as a defense to to not reject them,
Right.
because whoa, you can still get some good out of that person. That, yeah, they might have some issues, but you can still get some good out of that person, and you shouldn't throw the good away with the bad. So we're going to explore that topic a little bit and how the woke use it to then manipulate you.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that you bring up these phrases because the first two times that I've heard the phrase "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater" was in reference to John Piper. That was the first one that I heard. The second one, there, eat the meat and spit out the bones. The second one that or that one that I heard the first time I heard that phrase was actually with Russell Moore. And so when you go and you say that the woke use this, this isn't something that we're just trying to say, hey, they manipulate this, and they're going to try to say that there's some good in there, and then but there's none good, or nothing good in it, whatnot. And we're not just trying to like make this up. This is actually something I've encountered multiple times, and in fact, the first
Mm-hmm.
two times I was introduced to the phrases. Have you encountered this, Kyle?
Far too many times. And it seems to be the favorite defense, not of woke people themselves, like it's a woke person who's using this as a defense, but of potentially well-meaning, I'm not going to give a broad statement there of everyone's well-meaning or everyone's not, but of potentially well-meaning Christians looking at you bringing up reasons why this person shouldn't be trusted, and them going, yeah, well, they still have some good. Most often I see it when they're bringing up a piece of content that they like from this author, this speaker, this pastor, whatever it is, and it might in it itself be good, but you warn them about, hey, do you know where that person is at now, or what they believe, or
Mm-hmm.
all these factors about them that make them dangerous? And the response is either literally using the phrase or getting at the heart of it of, well, I'm just reading the good and rejecting the bad.
Right. And where this really tends to get dangerous, in another place that I see this is pastors will go and this is the one that generally comes up is Tim Keller. They'll go and they'll quote Tim Keller in the sermon because all the woke guys always quote Tim Keller. I don't know what it is. He's like the one thing that the woke guys all agree on 100% is that you have to quote Tim Keller 3 times every sermon. But they go and they quote Tim Keller, and you'll go and you'll say, well, that's not a good sign. That probably means your church is woke if your pastor's quoting Tim Keller. And they'll go, oh, no, no, no. Yeah, I mean, I know Tim Keller, he's not right on everything, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But the issue is that Tim Keller, of course, is overtly woke, and maybe not quite in the way that some of the radical Methodists are, and things like that. Like he might not have colored his hair pink or something like that, mostly because he doesn't have hair. But Tim Keller, the issue is that once you start sitting under Tim Keller, there's not that even if there were a baby that you weren't supposed to throw out the bathwater, you come to find out that there's a whole lot more bathwater than there is baby there. And so the problem is that it really starts to corrode you, and you start to realize that what you thought you were holding on to as a baby is actually just bathwater in the shape of a baby. It was just bubbles or something. I don't know what it is there,
Yeah.
but it doesn't work. And have you seen that too, Kyle?
I I've 100% see that. Not just in the woke sphere. And I am really tempted to just go on all sorts of rabbit trails of other places that I've seen this. But this is Wokepedia, and we're going to keep it, focused mainly on woke. But I've definitely seen that of people using the phrase as a defense, and then you talk to them more, and you realize that they've imbibed some of the negative ideologies, and now they might not be. Go to Jude rails on false teachers,
Mhm.
false teaching, and then he gives the advice right at the end of have mercy on those who doubt, Others save by snatching him out of the fire, and others show mercy with fear, hating even the garment stained by the flesh.
Right.
They're going to be in that first category. They're not
Mhm.
full on woke adherents. They're not full on false teachers of wokeness. They're just someone that got tainted a little bit because they touched something that they shouldn't have. And it
Right.
started to leak in a little bit. The problem
Mhm.
is that leaks into them, and then downstream, it leaks into the people that they disciple, it leaks into their children, and suddenly you've lost a generation.
Right.
And that's not alarmism. I mean, have we seen that before in this country? Have we seen entire generations radically rebel against what their parents supposedly held to?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that just that's reality.
Eh,
I mean, does the Bible say things in it about raising up children to know the truth? Does it say anything in there about that and the benefits
well, I
that
mean
that has?
I mean, there is this book of Proverbs, that talks about that repeatedly. And I think it's interesting that you bring up Jude because Jude literally says that these are spots in a love feast.
Hmm.
And when we read that, we might be thinking, okay, a spot in a love feast, is that like that weird stuff in tapioca pudding? Like for those down south, you're going to have to look up some, Minnesota reference to understand that. I'm from Iowa, but close enough to Minnesota to get that. You got to go up north though to understand tapioca pudding. But they might be saying like, what are these spots? Well, it literally is talking about I a rock in your love feast. Could you imagine like eating a piece of bread and all of a sudden you're like, my teeth just broke. Some of you guys, maybe your moms weren't very good at cooking, and you're saying, yes, I can understand, but that's. I mean, I don't want to get in too much trouble here, Kyle. So maybe I'll walk that one back. Um, but that's literally what it's talking about here is that it looks good. It looks okay on the outside. It's hidden. It's literally an enemy within the bread, or in our case, an enemy within the church. And you're going and you're trying it out, and you come to find out that it wasn't a piece of bread alone, it was a rock that was in there. And so when they say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, really we should be saying, well, don't take a bite of a piece of bread with a rock in it. Like, I know that doesn't roll off the tongue near as well, but that's what Jude's talking about here is these
Hmm.
spots in the love feast, and that's what these woke guys are. And so it might look okay initially, just picking out a little bit of the good stuff, but it's going to actually severely damage you and not accomplish the purpose that you're supposed to have.
Oh yeah, and the question, and this is kind of a central point of mine, just in this whole conversation that we're having here. But the question that I ask people when they use this as a defense, whatever phrase they use, or even if they're just using the thought of it, the question I give is why? Why would you go to something that you know has error in it when you have the option to go to something that doesn't? Especially nowadays when we have just near limitless access to information. If you really
Hmm.
need some evangelical speaker to follow, why would you go to one that you know is compromised?
Right.
What's the point? That seems like you're why would you go to why would you eat a chicken nugget that has we'll go better than chicken nugget. Why would you eat a chicken tender that has a bone in it? I'm not talking like a good chicken wing. I'm talking just like some sort of chicken tender, and for some reason let the
Right.
bones in. When you could go for the same price buy boneless ones, and you don't have to worry about eating and chewing on a bone. You're just eating, and you got
Right.
more for your money. There's more value there, and there's more safety. Why wouldn't you go for that?
I mean, that's what we're getting at here, I think, with this whole idea. And I don't know that we can really address this without at least mentioning the idea of celebrity. It really does
Mhm.
have a lot to do with celebrity because it of course, back in the day, you're stuck with your local pastor, and I don't mean stuck in a bad way. It's the idea of you're there with that teaching, or at least whatever church you're going to, or maybe you could go and read, like a newspaper once a week that came out, or something like that, or read a book. Well, the problem is today, like you mentioned, Kyle, there's limitless access to all these guys, to all of these
Yep.
people. And so instead of going to your local church, instead of going to your pastor, you're going and finding somebody who has a lot more bathwater than baby, a lot more bones than meat, and you're going to that error and you're finding it and you're trying to defend those things when you're going and saying, don't throw the baby out the bathwater, eat the meat, spit out the bones. When it comes to how the woke go and manipulate this, and one thing we do need to clarify too, of course, there's going to be disagreements. We're not talking about little disagreements here. Of course, you can always say, well, I'm going to eat the meat and spit out the bones. I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you need to make sure there is a baby there and you need to make sure that there is meat there. And when we're talking about some of this stuff, it's important to understand the Bible tells us sometimes just to stay away from it.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's critically important. And that's see, that's the other defense that I hear people. Now it's terrible logic. Terrible logic. We'll discuss why. But this is the other defense I'll hear people give is kind of like to undercut my argument of, well, why would you go to this something that you know has errors in it? Is essentially the, well, every no one has it all right. If you were to apply your logic, you couldn't go to anyone. Except that again, that's terrible logic because it doesn't drive itself to a conclusion. I can flip that around
Right.
and go to, well, why would you go to, why would you draw any sort of line? By
Right.
that same logic you just laid out, I should be able to go to a Mormon just like I would a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu, on and on and on, because you've made truth arbitrary. Now,
Right.
here's the thing, there is a different, and Sam, tell me if I'm wrong here, but there's a difference between obvious, overt, heretical, anti Christian, anti Christ, anti biblical teaching and the error of fallen man trying to faithfully exposit God's perfect word.
Right.
Now, is it is it hard to tell the difference between those two? Is there, or is it a blurred line? Is it a blurred line or is it kind of more of a cut and dry thing?
I think it's pretty cut and dry on a lot of that. It, and I mean, just to throw out a couple passages here, Kyle. So Second Timothy 2, verses 17 through 19 says this, and their message will spread like cancer. Let's just stop there for a minute. You had mentioned this whole idea of, is this alarmism? Well, if it's alarmism, what you were saying, that it's going to spread and corrupt an entire generation, then we have to say that the Bible is alarmism.
Yeah.
And if the Bible's alarmism, I'm aligned with the Bible. I don't think the Bible's alarmism. I think the Bible's just being true, but I'm always going to choose the Bible. And
Exactly.
um, but it says literally, they're thinking it's going to spread like cancer. And then it says, Hymenius and Philetus are of the sort who have strayed, concerning the truth, saying that the resurrection is already past, and they overthrow the faith of some. Now, just to kind of point this out, because it's interesting, a lot of people go and try to say, eschatology doesn't matter, and so let's just stay away from that. And there's this big driving of eschatology together and all this kind of stuff. E- e- Eschatology, a wrong eschatology. Now it's very bad eschatology here. It's talking about full preterism is really what it's getting at here. The idea that the resurrection's already happened, everything in Scripture has already happened. That's why it's overthrowing the faith of some. But that's what it's talking about eschatology even here as something to be aware of. Now, there's obviously an issue when sometimes people drive their entire theology with eschatology, but that's a topic for a whole nother day.
Yeah, errors do there is extremism on either side. You can always take something to an extreme, but just because one side has taken something to an extreme, again, in the case you're talking about people that claim that the Bible's done. Everything
Right.
in it has already been accomplished. There is no future things. It's 100% accomplished. Um, Kind of has problems considering that
If you
we
can
got a huge
read,
issue if that's
yeah,
the case. I haven't been resurrected yet,
tw-
but
twice for me. Just kidding. Just kidding. But
just because that someone's taken that extreme error does not mean then looking at and coming to a conclusion and answer to what the Bible says about the end times, that is not the opposite error. The opposite
right,
error is again what you mentioned, which is an over emphasis on eschatology, on end times to the point where it becomes your theology, to the point where
right,
the Bible itself is subordinate to your rampant view of whatever eschatology you have. You've built it up into something bigger than God Himself.
right.
That's
But
where the error lies.
right. And so you've got this Hymenius and Philetus who have gone and they've overthrown the faith of many. It says that their teachings is going to spread like cancer. This is very much sounding like social justice warriorism here that's going on with them. Obviously, it was a different error, but it's the same result of what we've seen in the United States and across the world, actually, with this. But then it says this, nevertheless, the solid foundation of God stands, having this seal: the Lord knows who are his, and let everyone who names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. There's a
Mm.
departing from guys like Hymenius and Philetus. And Hymenius, by the way, the Apostle Paul said and uh, said that he delivered him unto Satan. Like, well, uh, some people say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the Apostle Paul's like, I give him to Satan. I mean, that,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, obviously, that's not everyone that the Apostle Paul did that. You mentioned this too, Kyle. There are some we make a distinction on having compassion. There's some
Mhm.
we go and snatch them out of the fire, heating even the garment defiled by the flesh. There is a distinction between these two things. But
Mhm.
there is that snatching, which is a violent action, is what it's talking about in Jude. It's not
Well,
violent as in,
uh,
punching people necessarily, but but harsh.
how did Paul help snatch the sinful Corinthian man out of the fire? How did he do that? What did he do?
Excommunicated him.
Yep, that's a pretty darn harsh thing. And what happened? What was the result?
Repentance.
Yeah, it can be a pretty extreme process. Again, that's why it's violent analogy, snatching out of the fire.
Right. Um, just another another passage I think that we need to talk about, Kyle. And this is 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Do not be unequally yoked. Does this apply to this whole concept of, don't throw the baby out the bathwater, eat the meat, spit the bones? Does this apply?
Well, I think that verse mostly is about marriage and sometimes about business relationships and contracts. Um, so no, 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 no. It's about something deeper than that. And yes, it applies. You're not supposed to be unequally yoked. There's a bigger principle that Paul's getting at, and it is theological.
Right. And
And yeah, you should not yoke truth with error.
this is so important to understand this one, because this is really why you're not supposed to go and get together with the woke and say, "Well, I'm going to accept this." One of the most common ones, by the way, is saying, "I'm not a Tim Keller fan. I know he's woke, but he has a really good marriage book." I've literally heard that probably 50 times, maybe more. And I've never read Tim Keller's marriage book, so I'm not going to come out here and say that there's, um, that it's garbage or anything like that. But I can tell you, Tim
Yeah,
Keller's
man.
theology is garbage.
Yeah, but I'm sure that the ghostwriter did a really good job with it.
Probably.
And that's not a joke. It's just at Tim Keller, and I don't know if Tim Keller specifically uses ghostwriters, but
No,
people, most of your evangelical celebrities, look at the amount of time they have in a week, and look at the amount of things they supposedly get done. This is why things like Docent exist, a
right.
group that writes sermons for pastors. This is
Hmm.
why ghostwriters exist, and unfortunately, most of your evangelical celebrities are using them.
Yeah. Well, and that's um, maybe we shouldn't get into that. I was just gonna say, it's not always the leftist celebrities either. There's a lot of people who would say that are on the right who also use ghostwriters.
Did I make a distinction when I said? I said evangelical
Yep.
celebrities.
Yep.
It's all of
Yep.
them. It's not okay what
Right.
side you are on theologically. It's not okay. Stop it. You know who you are.
Right.
Stop it.
Right. It's not possible for somebody to work 4 full-time jobs. Just gonna throw that out there. It's just not possible. But this whole idea here of not throwing the baby out the bathwater, one of the reasons why it's so effective and why the woke can manipulate so well is because any good lie is going to have some amount of truth to it.
Yep.
And this is where the manipulation happens.
Yep.
So, an example of this, I was going through a situation, actually, walking through with another pastor situation with church discipline, and it was kind of an ugly situation. And one of their former members came to our church, kind of a thing. And so we're working through this whole thing before they ended up, yeah, joining or anything like that. I want to do it the right way. I mean, I have been publicly criticizing this church before, and yet still want to go through the right process. I mean, that's really important to go and to do that. It doesn't matter how right somebody is on the issues. If they're not willing to go through the right processes, you should have a red flag there. I would say that that's a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And and,
Amen.
and, s- and so I mean, I reached out to this church, and we came over, and I was talking to one of their elders as their structure that they had. And we're going through this, and they're coming to me, talking to me about church discipline and going through all this. And pretty soon they bring up a guy by the name of Jonathan Lehman, who I don't know how familiar people are with Jonathan Lehman. He hasn't been superly in the news here lately because David French has been hogging all the headlines on the stupid woke things to say.
Which
But
I have confused their pictures before. They do look really similar when they both have beards.
they do. They do. I actually, when you said, like, I hadn't thought about that until you just said that. They do look very similar. But Jonathan Lehman studied at the London School of Economics. He's a socialist. He's with that, or at least a trained socialist in that sense, going to the London School of Economics. He works with the nine Marxists. I mean, nine Marx, and He on stage with Mark Dever went and, of course, said that it's okay. You can vote for those who are pro baby murder and still be pro life because they're compassionate towards those who are on the other side of the border. Completely conflating all kinds of stuff. I mean, just not a good guy. But this guy comes in and he says he wrote this really good piece on church discipline. And I have to tell you something. He did. It was exactly at least the portion that was quoted to me. I was in complete agreement with. I have never quoted positively Jonathan Lehman from the pulpit, nor will I ever positively quote Jonathan Lehman from the pulpit because I'm not going to play the don't throw the baby out with the bathwater game. We're going to separate from evil because this was one of the problems that this church had was that they had some good foundational theological roots, but they constantly leaned on the theology of Tim Keller, Jonathan Lehman, and all of your typical normal social justice people. In fact, they had a big thing with Russell Moore. They might even had Russell Moore come and speak there in all this kind of stuff. And so they would lean, they had some good foundations, but then they would lean on the woke stuff. And guess where they are today? Woke. That's where they are. I mean, they've been woke.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people use this defense
Right.
incredibly selfishly to a point that just it frustrates me. It makes me incredibly sad, and it's particular pastors when they do this
Mm-hmm.
because maybe you. Here's the thing. I will grant you this in this hypothetical situation. I will say that your armor is impervious, that you are able to weed through it and you are able to only extract the truth, and you're able to shut down the error from influencing you, all of the error. 100%. That's not how people's minds work. Simple repetition does start to warp how your brain interprets things subconsciously. Don't
Right.
give it a foothold. But I don't care. You can be that impervious, but you're a leader. You're a shepherd, and you're shepherding what? You're shepherding sheep. Anyone ever been on a farm before? You ever worked with sheep or goats? Those things are dumb. They
Yeah.
are so dumb. And God was so good to use that as an analogy for us because we can be just as foolish as sheep. We need a shepherd. We need someone to guide us. Now, when you're in a church context, you're talking about a local congregation, a local flock, you're leading a lot of people that are not going to have that level of armor that you have, that level of theological knowledge that you have. And it's incredibly selfish of you to say, I'm impervious to this, therefore I'm going to expose my congregation to it. When you're a shepherd and you're there to expose them to the truth and to fend off error, what you
Right.
just did is you commended to them a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Mm-hmm.
You gave now let's go to the hypothetical. Maybe theoretically, you just let that wolf into the flock, and maybe it leaves before it kills anyone.
Maybe.
But does that make you a responsible shepherd?
No.
No, it still makes you an irresponsible shepherd to have let the wolf have an opportunity to get that close to your flock.
I
Now
think you
again,
bring
it
up a
goes
really
beyond
good
just
point.
pastors. Yeah, go ahead.
I think you bring up a really good point with that. And I'll just touch briefly. Even if the sheep don't get hurt by bringing in somebody with bad theology like that, bringing a woke guy, the pastor's responsibility isn't what the sheep eat, it's to pastor well, it's to shepherd well. and it's not based on the end results. It's based upon the actions that he was taking. And so even if you're coming out and saying like, "Well, but my sheep haven't gotten hurt by it." Pastors, no, you're treading into some really bad ethical water.
Yeah. I
Sorry.
mean, that's essentially ends justify the means.
Yep,
If you get them to truth, well, it doesn't matter how you got them there.
it does.
Again, what happens when people apply that logic throughout history? Doesn't it often lead to a pile of bodies?
It does.
Yeah, so that's not should that be the oh, being someone who grew up in the greater Seattle area, I get to quote this with much authority. Uh, that's the logic that Mark Driscoll applied when he said that with God's grace, there'll be a pile of dead bodies behind the Mars Hill bus by the end. Because they're going to, anyone that doesn't get along with them, they're going to kick out of the bus and run over with the bus. Yeah, it's an actual quote that he said. That is not good shepherding. That is literally applying ends justifying the means.
Y
That's
and
uh
well, and Driscoll, we don't have time to get into Driscoll. Although I'd love to get into Driscoll sometime. He is a perfect example of this whole baby don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because he is literally the definition of the chaff driven by the wind, that he changes his
mm,
doctrinal position so many times depending on which way is the
yeah.
cultural wind blowing, and it goes in like, I mean, I've seen quotes where he was both, you know, on both sides of the COVID issue, depending on where you're at. I mean, like, trying to, make big headlines. And so it's one of those things of, two, you need to find the solid theologians to go and to actually quote, to actually go and to stand with, to actually go and to be with, because what happens, you don't have somebody who's rooted. And so you might be going and saying like, look, here's a good person to go and to follow, to go check out, to go and to do this. And then they might change their position.
Yeah. And that,
That's not saying
well,
repentance can't happen, of course, but
yeah, and it's something that I've had to come to as I've grown up with different things. Uh, I'm a child of the early 2000s. Born beginning of the 90s, so my teen years were in the early 2000s. Um, and Christian music was huge in the early 2000s. I'm talking about Christian rock music, huge,
yep.
huge, 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 huge business. And now 90s and 2000s musicians left and right are walking away from the faith.
Mhm.
And in reality, they're not walking away from the faith. They're exposing that they never were of the faith, especially when you listen to their stories. My goodness, most of them will actually admit that they're basically just faking it. But, I had to come to a decision. Am I going to keep listening to that music or recommend this band at this point? And the more I grew up, the more I went, I think my only motivation to keep it is selfishness.
Mhm.
Because now, even there's been a couple examples of someone walking away and then that actually brings them to salvation and they come back and I go, well, why would I keep this? Why would I keep this thing that even though it might technically be correct in what you said in this song, why would I keep it when you were dishonoring God through it? You were blaspheming by pretending to be of the faith when you weren't.
Right.
That's not honoring to God. Why would I keep this? I don't need this. I don't need it. And again, that goes back to one of my other things. First thing is why? Why wouldn't you go to something good? Why would you go to
Mhm.
something you have to spit out the bones? Why would you go to have something where you have to worry about accidentally throwing your child out when you drain the tub? Um, seriously, like, get a different bathtub. Uh, but then the other thing is, why why keep the bad thing?
Right.
Why? You don't need it. Do you need it? No, you don't need it. I it to me, it hurts my mind. I can see the logic I used when I was younger. There would be a lot of things that I would try and justify, and I would try and keep, and I would try and do this, and I'd bend myself backwards. And now I've gotten to a point of, but I don't need it.
Right. And we do want to remind everybody this is how the woke manipulate. And there is a huge manipulation that comes with all of this, and it is manipulation to try to get people within good places of influence, and that's why we see the woke grow so much in the Gospel Coalition and grow so much in the Southern Baptist Convention, is because it was this idea of bringing some form of an orthodoxy or something that you would cling to and saying, "Well, I know you don't agree 100%. I mean, nobody agrees 100% everything. Just eat the meat, spit out the bones." And pretty soon you see
Mhm.
entire groups collapse and fall into wokeism.
So a beautiful example popped into my head. And I think this will I'm specifically talking I want to give an example that hopefully will help someone who doesn't agree with what we're saying
Mhm.
or is struggling to get the kind of the full concept of what we're saying. I think this might help you because this will probably be something that you'll agree on more readily. Bethel Church, Redding, California, uh, the one that does such ridiculous things as pump gold dust through the AC and feathers to claim that angels were visiting and things of that nature, believing that they can soak up the anointing from dead saints' graves, uh, claiming that, anyway, on and on and on, completely false gospel, completely sets themselves up against the true gospel, very blatantly states that. Uh, and what are they famous for? They're two bands, Bethel Music and Jesus Culture, which now dominate. Well, I think with the disgracing of Hillsong, I think they're the number one, played
I would assume
in
so.
millions of churches. They've told you why. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. They've told you why chew the meat, spit the bones is dangerous. They've overtly stated that one of their goals in their music ministry, quote ministry of Satan, is to get into churches and through the music get that church to then get interested in the theology, come and be trained by them, and then transformed into a clone of their church. They've explicitly stated that. Beyond just them stating that, a church in my home, the city over from where I grew up in, they big into all this. They were the local mega church uh, for that county, and they were very seeker sensitive. Now they're three quarters woke, uh, but they through playing all of this music, through creating this, oh well, nah, it doesn't really matter. We might not agree with them, but mentality of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, wishy washiness. One of their satellite campuses. Now the story is confusing because both sides claim something different. Either they realized what was going on at the campus and fired the pastor, and then the whole congregation left with the pastor and started a new church, or they decided to cut off their association. Who knows what's true? But they converted to the same theology as Bethel, and then now literally fly up speakers from Bethel to talk to them, uh, for a price, teach them how they can raise people from the dead, and again for a price. Uh,
Eh,
it's they overtly stated, "Hey, we want you
Mhm.
to apply this bad logic to us so that we can then infiltrate you and convert you.
Right.
It works.
It does, and that's the thing is that when you bring in the bad theology, when you bring in the bad theologians, when you do this, it really does get a hook into people. And one of the issues is, and we see this through sports. When we see that somebody is an authority or an expert in one field, we assume that they're an authority and an expert in every field, which is really dumb.
Mm.
And because somebody can dribble a basketball really well, all of a sudden they should tell us who to vote for. All of a sudden they should tell us ethics. All of a sudden they should tell us all these things.
Ugh.
And by the way, I'm not a pietist. I think people should be involved in public and stuff like that. But I also will never forget watching Greg Oden, a guy who's mostly been forgotten, but he was, number one draft pick over Kevin Durant, all this kind of stuff. And he was a one and done college player, and he's sitting there on ESPN News, and they're interviewing him, and he's got a mohawk. There, he just just did it. He looks like he's about 70 years old because he just had one of those faces that he looked like he was old from probably the time when he was 4. He probably looked like he was 16, kind of a guy. But he was sitting there telling people to vote for Barack Obama. And people were going to go and vote for Barack Obama because this 19-year-old guy who spent his entire life playing basketball, like every moment, he hasn't been studying politics, he hasn't been studying ethics, he hasn't been studying nations, he hasn't been doing any of those things. He's been playing basketball because he said to go and vote for Barack Obama, which is dumb. And I'm not even trying to discredit somebody by their age or anything like that. We should be seeking the objective truth. But the reality of it is that when you go and you look at somebody and they're so elite in one skill that doesn't even kind of relate to something over here, we should probably think the opposite, that they probably have no clue what they're talking about when it comes to theology or politics or anything like that, because they've spent all their time honing in on these things. But if you let that get a hook into you and you start to idolize, start to really view them as a celebrity, what ends up happening? Well, you're going to be influenced by those people,
Mhm.
and they're
That's why they're called
they're
influencers.
marketing, right? They're marketing something to you, and that's that. You're right. Most of these theologians, the woke theologians or whatnot, they really are nothing more than community organizers and influencers, and they're good at that.
Was and this goes into something, and this will probably be my last comment because I think we're getting to a point where we should wrap up. But something I was realizing this week, and I've realized it before, but it's kind of one of those things when you're doing research and you're looking at these people, and you come to it again, and you're like, how does this operate? Is how many of these people, these career theologians, that is particularly like ones that have a position at a seminary or something like that, have never worked a job. They're
Yep.
Bernie Sanders. They don't know what the real world is like. They went to college, went to seminary, graduated, and immediately got a position at the seminary or at another school or at some sort of institution. And it's just like, eh, wh- why do I trust you? You've all you've done is academic, which is important, but you've proven nowhere that you can wield that knowledge correctly.
Right.
You've done nothing to show that you understand the world itself at large. All you've proven is you have paper knowledge. Yet I'm supposed to fork over ridiculous amounts of money for your books and your speaking events and your trainings and all this other stuff over and above my local pastor who's been in the trenches of ministry, caring for people, getting beaten up week after week. And yeah, some of these guys are pastors too. Although look into that, a lot of these guys are pastors in name only because they're put on an administrative position at their church.
Right.
but then I'm supposed to trust these guys who have shown nothing about their trustworthiness, nothing about how to actually wield the knowledge, but just I don't know. It bothers me. It really bothers me.
Yeah. I'm right there with you, and I think that is such an important thing to go and to understand, to really look at. A lot of these people, how do they do it? Well, they've never done it. They've never done anything in life. They've never been anywhere, like you said. Even the ones that are pastors, a lot of them have never even prepared sermons because they are getting their stuff from docent. They are having somebody else going doing that. They're good at delivering stuff. They're good at influencing people. They're good at manipulating people, and that's why we're going and exposing the
Yeah.
manipulations of the woke. And I think this is a good way to start off season 2 of Wokepedia. And so I'm excited to see what season 2 has for us. So you need to remember to come and check in every Friday. Set your timer or whatever you got, your alarm system. Have it ring for you. And of course, find all of our stuff at enemieswithinthechurch.com. There's going to be tons more content that's coming out, all kinds of fun stuff. So stay with us. Keep standing for the truth. And Kyle, are you going to say it?
I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it right now. I'm going to say it. Don't go woke.